It was a bitter, bone-chilling day, in the bleak heart of February 1957. A young man, a college student, wandered into the tangled woods on the edge of Philadelphia, unaware that he was about to stumble into a nightmare. The place was called Fox Chase, a name that would soon echo with dread. He was only checking his muskrat traps, a simple, harmless routine, or so he thought. But what he found lurking in those woods was neither simple nor routine. It was the stuff of nightmares. Hidden just off the lonely stretch of Susquehanna Road, he glimpsed a large cardboard box. Abandoned, ominous, out of place. The kind of box meant for a new appliance, but now it sat like a silent warning. A brand new bassinet from JCPenney, the label still clinging to its side, a cruel detail in what was to come. Curiosity, that dangerous urge, crept in and took hold of him. He nudged the box, as if testing the edge of a nightmare. He peered inside, heart pounding, and what he saw would haunt his dreams forever, a vision so ghastly it would never let him go. A sight that would cast a long, chilling shadow over Philadelphia for decades to come. Inside that box, shrouded in a faded plaid blanket, was the lifeless body of a small boy, fragile, abandoned, and alone. He couldn't have been more than 4 or 5, a child lost to the darkness. The student, shaken to his core, kept the secret to himself. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was the terror of what he had seen. Days later, another man just passing by caught sight of the box, as if the horror inside refused to stay hidden. He stopped, unease prickling at his skin. He looked, dread settling in, and then, with trembling hands, he called the police. When the officers arrived, they stepped into a scene that would forever scar their memories. The air was heavy, the woods suffocatingly silent. And there, in that forsaken box, lay a puzzle so twisted it would torment generations. The scene was eerily quiet, as if the world itself recoiled from what had happened. The boy was curled on his side, tiny arms crossed over his chest. He was unclothed, but placed with a strange, unsettling care inside the box, a final, haunting gesture before abandonment. It was a detail that chilled the soul. When the medical examiner took a closer look, the story became even more heartbreaking. The boy was small for his age, severely malnourished. His body was covered in small scars, old scars, new scars. Some scars were surgical on his ankle, surgical on his groin, but others were more mysterious. His hair had been recently and crudely cut, with clumps of his own blonde hair still clinging to his body. It was a strange detail investigators couldn't shake. Was it an attempt to disguise him, or something else entirely, a ritual? It was impossible to know. The boy had striking blue eyes. His face, even in death, was angelic. The police took post-mortem photographs to trigger recognition. It was a difficult decision, a grim necessity. They dressed the boy in children's clothes. They sat him up in a small chair. They took his picture. They wanted the world to see him not as a victim in a box, but as a child who belonged to someone. Those photos were plastered on posters, printed in newspapers, displayed across the city and beyond. Surely someone would recognize those eyes. A neighbor, a teacher, a relative. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. People were horrified, but they were also moved to action. The investigation began with a massive push, a full-court press by the Philadelphia police. They printed and distributed flyers. More than 400,000 flyers with the boy's photograph and description. They sent them to police departments, coroner's offices, hospitals all across the country. They checked the records of every birth and every disappearance they could find. The JCPenney box was traced. It had been sold at a store in Upper Darby, Pennsylvania, a promising lead. But thousands of those bassinets had been sold. The records were impossible to trace back to a single buyer. Another dead end. Detectives chased down every lead, no matter how small or how strange. They looked into orphanages, foster homes, transient communities. They followed up on tips that sent them across state lines. One promising lead pointed to a foster home located just 1.5 miles from where the body was found. The investigators went there, spoke to the family. They saw blankets on the clothesline that looked similar to the one the boy was wrapped in. They saw a bassinet box. But after extensive interviews and investigation, the lead dissolved. There was no concrete evidence to connect them to the boy. The blanket the boy was wrapped in was another key piece of evidence. It was a common, inexpensive flannel blanket. It had been mended and washed many times over. Investigators took the blanket to textile experts, hoping to find a clue in its fibers, a unique thread that could lead them somewhere. But like the box, the blanket was too common, its origins too widespread to be of any real help. As the years went by, the boy became more than just an unsolved case file. He became a symbol. He was given a name by the press and the public, the boy in the box. It was a stark, sad title, but it kept his memory alive. He also became known more poignantly as America's unknown child. His story was a cautionary tale, a dark reminder of children who fall through the cracks, unseen and unheard. The haunting post-mortem photo of his face became etched in the public consciousness. He was a child that belonged to everyone and no one at the same time. The case captured the nation's attention. It became the subject of television shows, magazine articles, documentaries. Why this case? Perhaps it was the innocence of the victim, a small boy who had clearly suffered. Perhaps it was the baffling lack of identity, or maybe the profound sense of collective responsibility people felt. This anonymous child represented a failure of society to protect its most vulnerable. People wanted to give him dignity and restore his stolen identity. He was laid to rest in a potter's field, the cemetery for the unclaimed and unknown, but he was not forgotten. Investigators and citizens purchased a headstone for his grave. It read, "America's unknown child, Heavenly Father, bless this unknown boy." For decades, people visited the grave, leaving flowers and small toys. It became a quiet pilgrimage site. The case changed how law enforcement and the public thought about missing children. In the 1950s, there was no national missing persons database or coordinated information sharing. The boy in the box highlighted that desperate need. His case helped spark the creation of organizations like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. His lonely death, in a strange way, helped build a safety net to protect other children. Over the decades, with no solid answers, theories began to fill the void. They ranged from the plausible to the outright bizarre. One of the most persistent theories centered on that foster home near the discovery site. The story, as it was told, was that the boy was the illegitimate child of the stepdaughter of the man who ran the home. The theory went that his death was an accident, and the family, in a panic, disposed of his body to avoid a scandal. Investigators looked into this for years, but could never find enough evidence to make an arrest. It remained a compelling story, but a story nonetheless. Another prominent theory was brought forward by a woman identified only as M. In 1998, she came to the police with a shocking tale. She claimed her abusive mother had purchased the boy from his birth parents. She said her mother had subjected the boy to horrific physical and sexual abuse, and that his death was the result of a violent outburst. According to M, her mother then forced her to help dispose of the body in Fox Chase. Her story was detailed and chilling. Investigators found her credible, but parts of her story didn't quite line up with the physical evidence. And with her history of mental illness, her account, while compelling, could not be fully substantiated. Then there were the sightings and the strange encounters. One witness, a man who was a teenager in 1957, came forward decades later. He said he and his friends had seen a man and a woman with a boy who looked just like the boy in the box at a local park. He said the woman was speaking harshly to the boy. For decades, the investigation relied on old-fashioned police work, shoe leather, intuition. But as the 20th century drew to a close, a new kind of detective entered the scene, the forensic scientist. The field of forensics was exploding with new technologies, tools that could see what the human eye could not. And the most powerful of these tools was DNA. DNA analysis offered a revolutionary promise, the ability to identify a person from the smallest biological trace. For cold cases like the boy in the box, it was a beacon of hope in the darkness. In 1998, the boy's body was exhumed from its grave in the potter's field. It was a somber, delicate process. Investigators and forensic experts gathered as the small casket was raised from the earth. Their goal was to retrieve a sample of his DNA. They carefully took a piece of a tooth where the DNA would be best preserved. The technology at the time was still developing. They were able to extract a mitochondrial DNA profile which could be used to trace maternal relatives. But when they ran it through the existing databases, there were no matches. It was another disappointment, but it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The extracted DNA was carefully preserved. Scientists knew that technology would only get better. They were playing a long game. As the years passed, forensic genealogy became a game-changer for cold cases. This new technique involved taking an unknown person's DNA profile and uploading it to public genealogy databases, GEDmatch, Family Tree DNA. It was like putting together a giant, complex puzzle piece by genetic piece. The final push began in 2019. Using the DNA sample that had been so carefully preserved, Forensic experts were able to generate a full genetic profile. They enlisted the help of leading genetic genealogists, the best in the business. These experts uploaded the profile to the public databases and began the painstaking work of finding a match. And they found one. A distant relative. Then another, and another. Slowly, carefully they began to build a family tree around the unknown boy. It was a complex web of names and dates, stretching back generations, branching out across the country. Working with the Philadelphia Police Department, the genealogists focused on one branch of the family tree. They followed it down to a family that had lived in West Philadelphia. They found a birth certificate for a boy born on January 13, 1953. The father's name was on the certificate, and so was the mother's. The child's name was Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Using this information, investigators were able to obtain a court order to get the birth records of all the children born to that mother. It was the final piece of the puzzle. The genealogists had done their work. They had found him. In December of 2022, 65 years after a small boy was found in a cardboard box, the city of Philadelphia held a press conference. The room was packed with reporters, police officers, and investigators, both active and retired. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. And then, the police commissioner stepped up to the microphone and said the words that so many had waited so long to hear. The boy in the box, America's unknown child, had a name. His name was Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Giving Joseph his name back was a monumental achievement, but it opened a new chapter full of questions. Who were his parents? What were their circumstances? Investigators found living relatives, mother's side, father's side. Authorities protected their privacy. Both parents were deceased. He had siblings still alive. For a family who may never have known, a profound shock. For investigators, the moment was deeply emotional. Past investigators, present investigators, careers haunted by this case, finally felt closure. The identification doesn't solve everything. It doesn't explain how he died or who caused his harm. The case remains an active homicide investigation. His name and family history provide a roadmap. They can explore his parents' lives, their circle of friends, their neighbors. They can piece together the last years of Joseph's life. The name is a beginning, not an end. A key that could unlock final secrets. Giving him his name restores his humanity. For 65 years he was the boy in the box. Now he is Joseph. Born, lived, had a family. We can mourn him as a child. He is finally and forever known. That is a form of justice.